Welcome to Desi Return Diaries, Embracing Home Again, the podcast that shares personal journeys and expert insights on returning to India. I'm your host, Avinash Pedi, here to guide and inspire you on your Desi return journey. Welcome to another episode of Desi Return Diaries. Today's episode is very special. So this is part 2 of our episode from past, which is episode 3, where we have talked to Karthik, where he shared about his return to India journey. This episode is a specific deep dive into FIRE, which is retire early. We will get into the details in terms of Karthik's approach, how he planned for FIRE in India. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. With that, welcome Karthik to the show.
Thank you so much, Avinash. Nice to meet you again.
Same here. So Karthik, maybe let's start with defining the FIRE. From your perspective, what it is, and explain a little bit for our audience.
Yeah. So the definition of FIRE in its most simple form is reach a position in life where you are no longer working for money. So you're able to quit your 9 to 5 job and do anything that you want without having to worry about how do you manage your family expenses.
Cool. So that's great. I think it's basically the independence of not to work from a financial perspective. So you have the flexibility to do what you want. And just as an definition, the FIRE is like basically financially independent, retire early. But retire early is subjective, but the main objective here is not to work for money, and you can do what you would love to do. So that is the key core concept of that.
Right.
So Karthik, I mean, if you can explain from your perspective, like how did you approach it? I think this is something that you have planned while living in US. I think you wanted to do this FIRE when you move back, so you don't want to work for money when you're living in India. So if you can talk through your framework on how you approach, this number, like how you thought about the cost of living, so that would be very helpful.
Yeah, Avinash. If you think about FIRE, there are actually multiple variations of FIRE. If you go by the academic definition of FIRE, there is something called a fat FIRE, where it's fat FIRE essentially means that you want to maintain the same standard of living even after you quit your job. So in order to achieve that, the corpus needed or the structuring of your the plan is different than, like, for example, lean FIRE. Lean FIRE is where you, after you quit your 9 to 5 job, you cut down on your expenses and you live very modestly. So, and then there is something called barista FIRE, where you do quit your 9 to 5 job in that, but then you try to compensate by doing something else, which might not be as taxing as your 9 to 5 job, but it still gives you some income.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have planned so far is a barista FIRE, where, like, my wife, for example, has taken up a job which is not very pressurized. Like it's not very taxing on our family, and so there is some sort of income coming in. Of course, it's not matched to what we used to earn earlier, but then we chose to be, before we moved to any of those stricter forms of FIRE, we thought a barista FIRE would be a little bit more on the road for us. So so as far as definitions go, you have to first choose, like, what type of lifestyle you want to achieve after you do FIRE.
Mm-hmm.
and then you have to construct a plan towards it. And this has to be very early on, because to achieve FIRE, I think it's at least a decade worth of effort. So if I want, getting into more details, it's like you have to, first of all, plan as to how much you need, and then how you're going to save that much.
Mm-hmm.
right? So in our case, what we did was, and I think in most people, it's very relevant to the return to India family. They have the best chance of achieving fire amongst other people. Like for example, a person who works in US and wants to retire in US, it's going to be very hard for them to achieve fire because their expenses are going to be in the same category. And similarly for India as well. So it's only possible, I guess, for people who have worked in a Western country and are ready to switch to a low cost of living country like India.
Hmm.
I feel that is a pretty easy and doable way for many people. Um, yeah, I mean,
So I think that's a very good point. I think in terms of the cost of living, and like when you're earning to save that corpus fund, especially when you're abroad and working in a Western country, it's much easier to meet that corpus fund with the savings that you are managing in a Western country, and adjust that to the cost of living by living in a low cost living country, right? I think that's a key point there. So if we have to peel it a little bit more, is there some certain number that you can, like is it 30x of your cost of your annual cost? I don't know. Again, I think in your case, if you can talk a little bit specifics about what should be a corpus amount, or how should people think about what money that they have to save when they think that they would be good for the retirement, and also like how do they come up with that number, and any other insights. I think that would definitely help for them to people to understand tactically what they should be thinking about when they're thinking about fire in India as their R2I.
yeah. Yeah, great question. So I think there have been a lot of reports about fire in the US. And what has been figured out in the US is that there's a rule of 25 or 4% rule, like whichever way you want to call it, which is at the point when you retire, you need to have 25 times the annual expenses of your family. So that's a thumb rule that most people in US follow for their retirement. But when I did my research, I couldn't find any such rule for Indian growth and Indian inflation. So, so what I feel is, because of the lack of a concrete research report on this, what I feel is you could peel it this way. Uh, Typically for a family, the big ticket items are like a house, a car, and their kids' school expenses, like educational expenses. So if you take these three off the equation, then you have a very I mean, the amount of elasticity involved in your predictions is going to reduce. So what I suggest is figure out which city you want to live, figure out what kind of house you want to live, and how much does it cost now, and maybe if you can predict how much it's going to cost later. But what I would suggest to most people is before you do this fire, ensure you already own a house with no loan on it. You should not have any loans when you do a fire. So like once you have a house that you want to live in, that you think this is the house that is going to satisfy your family for the next decade or so, ensure your cars are paid off, you have money for it, and then think about which school you're going to put your kids in and what the school fee structure is. And once you take these three out, I would say the monthly expenses would range between 50,000 to 1 lakh a year in a metropolitan city. So that's what will otherwise, if you ask people, they'll have varying numbers because they have these three big chunks inside the equation. So my suggestion is remove these chunks, and then you can estimate it to be around 50,000 to 1 lakh, and you're very comfortable with it.
Okay, I think that's great. So the way I understood was, if you remove these big ticket items, which is the house, school, and the automobiles, and then the cost of living, we are talking about maybe, let's say, 50,000 to 1 lakh, which is what you need per month, and you have everything else is paid off. So that's what you need as a monthly expense. So
Right.
let's take that an example of 1 lakh that you have to, maintain, and you have everything paid off. What should be your corpus amount, when you are thinking about like living in India? So are we still looking at 25 times of, annual, which is like 12 lakhs? So in this case, we are talking about 1.8 CR or 2 CR. So just trying to make sure, what that number would be in that case, if you are somebody is thinking along those lines.
Yeah. So this 1 lakh of your expenses should be pretty liquid, and it should be pretty. It should be invested in pretty safe instruments, right? Because that's what you're going to live off. So you're right. This calculations would be around that. So let's go by the fixed interest rate of India. And I know nowadays it's high, but let's say an average of 6% or 5%. And then how much would you need to support 12 lakhs a year, right? So you're right about 2 CR would give you like 10 lakhs a year. So 2.5 CR would give you 12 lakhs, 12.5.
And how do you consider about the inflation adjustment? I know maybe the 1 lakh now is maybe a good amount for an expenses when we are in 2023, but a decade later, with the inflation, in India, which is a bit more higher than you see on Western countries, how do you approach about these inflation adjusted expenses and, the corpus fund, anything that you plan accordingly for that?
Yeah, so I would say because there's lack of research, what the best thing you could do is put the rest of your portfolio in inflation correlated investments. What I mean by that is like real estate, stock market. So that way, then these things tend to grow with inflation. So so you're kind of becoming inflation proof because your other investments are growing with inflation. So that's what what I told you in the starting is the minimum, right? At the minimum, you need to have a paid off house, but to beat inflation, you need to have extra investments in form of real estate. So then they can grow with inflation, and they can form a good nest egg, in retirement.
Okay. So maybe just to help the audience a little bit so that it's clear, sorry if I'm like, going a little bit specific here, but I think I just want to make it a little bit more clear for the audience. So the way I look at it is one is, paid off house, automobile, and, plan for the kids' education, right? So there is a good chunk of money that you put aside based on your needs. And there is something that you have, something that you put for a liquid, which is your monthly expenses. And then there is another pie of investment or some amount or corpus fund or the investment to beat the inflation adjustment. So that's what I think I heard. So you're looking at 3 different buckets, and I don't know if there is certain ratio or anything that you can, or for the third one, I think the first two are very clear, easy to calculate just based on everybody's needs. What that amount could be, I think it's very easy to calculate. But for the third one, for a core inflation adjustment investment, is there something that people have to think through in terms of the number, or how do they come up with that amount or the number, and what should they be planning in that particular category?
Got it. So the third bucket, where we talked about having real estate investment or stock investment, is the buffer, right? So the more you have, the more buffer you have. So I mean, I don't think there's a standard number for it, because it just depends on what your comfort level is for the amount of buffer you have, right? So yeah, I mean,
everybody's their own risk taking, their own comfort of what they need for this inflation adjustment. It's a little bit subjective, similar to like what they think about the first category, like how much of house they need or what kind of a car. This is also a little bit subjective in terms of what kind of risk they want to take and how much of buffer they want to think because of the inflation adjustments and so on. So it's I think if from a number perspective, people can think about like maybe 6 to 7% or 5% inflation in India. I mean, if you look at the history in terms of like what has been, and I think the key thing is whatever you are investing in this vehicle, it has to beat the inflation, and you're still maintaining that additional buffer that you have for your needs. I think that's a key message there, that it has to be invested in the returns after inflation has to be at least 3% or 5% more. That way, like it's inflation adjusted returns are higher to make sure that your buffer is always available for you.
Correct. And that's also where this notion of these types of fire come into picture, right? Like if you have really confident that the third bucket is big enough for you to live off it, then you're in the fat fire zone of fire, right?
Yeah.
But if you don't think you have enough, then you have to be in barista fire, where you have that additional income coming in, where you're keeping on adding to the third pile.
Got it. I think
Right?
that's a very good point in terms of how people are approaching the fire of living, and that determines like how much of pie that you need to maintain for your fire living. Yeah.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe let's step back a bit. So I think from your perspective, you have some numbers in mind. So can you talk a little bit about how you planned, or like how you thought through from a savings? I think you kind of mentioned about it would take at least a decade to go through that. Maybe there are a lot of sacrifices that you might have to do. I mean, to reach that, to the savings. Like it's like the fruits right now versus fruits later, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that you have to do to make sure that you are saving enough to meet this corpus fund. Anything that you can advise people who are living in US or abroad in terms of how they can think about from a savings or investments or plan to meet this corpus fund for these, for the fire?
Yeah, sure, Avinash. I feel you should never underestimate the power of compounding. So, uh, a dollar or a rupee you save early on in life will do much more good for you than a dollar you save towards end of your career. So what I mean is, people in their late 20s, early 30s, if you can have a lot of free cash flow in that age, and you invest that free cash flow in these good instruments, right? That will add a solid foundation to your fire goal. So I would say, like, we as a family, we were a double income family right from the start. So we were saving almost like 1.5 times our salaries, which is like 1% salary, and we would live off half person's salary.
So I'm assuming you're mentioning there after taxes, like in terms of the one
Yeah.
and a half. Yeah. Okay.
Typically, yeah, that's it. I mean, like 1% salary is for surely saved, and then another person we would hit around 50%, sometimes 40% is what we would save. And this we were able to do early on, and that I believe helped us lay the foundation, because we invested in our case, we invested in real estate of Hyderabad, but I know of a couple of friends who invested in stock market as well. So and we all know how well the stock market did the last 10 years. I mean, discounting the last 3 years, but overall, yeah, it's been good returns.
Yeah, I have to say kudos. I mean, I think saving one and a half of the salary. I mean, it's definitely a very stretch for a lot of people. But I mean, kudos for you to able to keep that uh, discipline, and making sure that you are saving enough for your corpus fund to have a better life in the later part of it. So I mean, thanks for sharing that. Um, Anything that you can advise people who are thinking about fire currently, and how they should approach it, or how should they plan? Anything that you can guide or advise them?
um, I would say, like, when you're young, what's more important is how much more can you earn than trying to save every dollar, because by squeezing on the bottom side, you can only go up to how much you earn, right? So what I say is, put more focus on learning new skills, increasing your uh, your
Income, or the money.
income. Exactly. Yeah, income or money. So that way, then you're able to save more. And then and some things are pretty obvious, right? Don't do stupid things like having a credit card balance and paying interest on it every month. So those are pretty obvious in my mind. Like, don't buy really fancy stuff. You don't have to live a really stingy life. You just lead a normal life, like what Indians are used to, right? Anyway, that's our upbringing growing up. So just continue that life. Yeah, and then try to earn more in the early stages of life and invest that.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think, as you said, it's important to focus on the inflow, which is like on the income side or on the thing. There is one point that I might want to add on there is, as there is an increase in your salary or increase in your income, your lifestyle does not have to be adjusted the same way. So, just be mindful about it, because the additional income that you're getting can be going towards a savings. So your savings rate would be increased because your income has gone up, but you can also maintain a decent lifestyle, and you don't have to adjust your lifestyle because just your income has gone up. So which makes it hard for your savings rate to increase, and which makes it hard to uh, achieve that corpus fund, because your lifestyle is also increasing, that which means that your 25x or 30x, the requirement is also changing. So keep that in mind. I think the focus is more on the early savings. The dollar saved early, as Karthik mentioned, is going to be much more value because of the compound interesting, and also maintaining a good lifestyle, and not being adjusting with the adjustment of the income. I think that plays a big role in terms of achieving the fire. Um, so, Karthik, from your perspective, is there anything that you would have done differently, or or any advice that you would provide to the audience, from based on your experience? And you have been living in India for maybe close to a year, approximately. So, based on your expectations and your living lifestyle, anything that you would do differently, or anything that you would advise people who are considering to do a fire with the return to India?
Um, so one thing if I could do differently was I would get early on in my age into the stock market. I think I was a little late. Than what I would have preferred. Earn like, and then because owning part of a company is a successful company is a great thing, and we shouldn't be scared of the losses that we see in the news. Uh, Having a long-term horizon will always ensure that you come profitable on the towards the end. And also at the same time, I would advise people to invest in the same city that they're planning to retire in early on, so you're able to keep up with the inflation of that city. So that way, even if at the point when you move into the city, you're not surprised. So that helped us early. That helped us a lot, because we always knew Hyderabad was our destination, and we have invested in Hyderabad like for at least a decade now.
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's the early investment, and try to do the investments in the city that you're planning to move, so that way that investment is already like kind of inflation adjusted, growth and whatnot. I think that you already would see. Yeah. And at the same time, I think people who are in not yet sure, I mean, I think they can definitely diversify, right, in terms of like they don't have to put all the eggs in one basket, like whether investing in US or whether investing in India. They can kind of diversify, and then once they're clear with their decision, I think they can decide on how they want to approach and move forward with that.
Correct. So the timing, I would say the timing is important. So what I would advise is, let's say you have this fire is a decade long plan. I would advise people to invest in their city in the first 5 years of their plan. So that way, then your investments are already going to catch up with the way the city is going to grow. And then the last 5 years, you can invest in the US. That way, you have a diversified portfolio, and at the same time, you're not going to miss out on the growth of the city, of the Indian city that's happening.
Yeah. Good. I think that's a lot of valuable information there, Karthik. Is there anything else that we haven't touched based or we haven't covered that you want to share with the audience?
No, I mean, I think fire is an amazing concept. A lot of people can achieve it uh, if if they if they can change their like I mean, they don't have to make a lot of changes, but if they have that as part of their goal in their long-term planning, it's pretty easily achievable for especially the return to India, the community.
Yeah. That's definitely a great point. And the key thing is the discipline. I think what you want in the life, and just go at it and be consistent with whatever that is, I think. And as Karthik mentioned, for folks who are planning to return to India, you have a best shot at it than people who want to retire or like who want to settle in US or vice versa, right? I think because you are moving to a low cost of living, comparatively, and so you have a best shot at fire. That. So thank you very much, Karthik, for taking your time and providing a lot of valuable information about your fire journey, what it means for you, and how you approached it. This is very helpful, and thanks a lot.
Thank you, Avinash.
Thank you all for joining us on this insightful journey of Desi Return. If you enjoyed this episode and want to explore more stories and expert advice, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts and experiences. By the way, check out the links in the description below for our Facebook group and social media for updates and engaging discussions, as well as connecting with fellow Desi Returners. Thank you once again, and until next time, may your Desi Return journey be filled with joy, growth, and endless possibilities.